It always helps to unmute yourself. That's one of the problems of going live.
Yes,
Well,
it is. Yep.
definitely. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to Bibles and Beer. Welcome to this updated twist on the Wednesday night Bible studies that you may have grown up with. Today, Reverend Dr. David Breeden will offer readings from the Hebrew and Christian scriptures that make up the Bible. We'll cover some of the Christian basics and explore the Bible's themes, contradictions, and the curiosities. Tonight, we're back to being judgy. Knives, daggers, girl power, right?
Hey!
So, David, what do we have on tap tonight?
Oh, I tell you what, Deborah is one of the judges and, well, the only female judge. So, we got to get something going here. So I am tonight drinking something called Good Behavior Crushable Ale. It is from Odell Brewing Company in Fort Collins, Colorado. So good girl, Deborah. Way to go.
That's one thing I'm not very good at. So good behavior. So.
Yeah. All right.
So are we ready to dig on in?
Well, sure. Let's get there. I mean, we have a stabbing and the creative use of tent stakes. So let's see what we got.
Okay, let's pop this sucker up.
All right, good. Well, you remembered at this point that the book of Judges is one of those books that was written much later in within the tradition after the texts had begun to come together, long after all of these events had actually occurred. And the book of Judges is a bridge between the conquering of Canaan with Joshua, the book of Joshua, and then the beginnings of the actual historic kings stories. And so this is a bridge, and most of these stories are tall tales. They may be slightly based on actual things that happened. There are some details that appear to be true, based in history, but for the most part, they're just tall tales. And for the first one, I want to look at someone who is creative with his knife. We got Ehud. Now, he's just one of the very minor judges in this. It is in chapter 3 of Judges, verses 12 through 30. And it has the pattern, however, of all the judges. And that is that the Israelite people go into apostasy. They ignore Yahweh. Then they have a hardship. Some other foreign power attacks them. Then they cry out to the Lord and say, forgive us. And then there is the rescue. So that's the general pattern of all of these. So let's look very quickly at this one. And so it will start with this apostasy. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened King Eglon of Moab against Israel because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice in this particular book over and over again is an older way of thinking about the way Yahweh or God does things. Does God do evil? Does God do bad things? Is a good question, right? Well, in this particular theology of this book, yeah. Actually, God is the one who sends these bad things to occur, and then people, just to get people to repent. And that's the pattern that goes on again and again and again. So here we have Ehud, son of Gera, the Benjamite, and we will get back to those tribes, a left-handed man. Now, this is a very uncommon in biblical days. It was considered sinister to be left-handed. So very few people actually went ahead and were left-handed openly, but this guy was. And this is the entire setup for this story. The Israelites sent tribute by him to King Eglon of Moab. Ehud made for himself a sword, so he's going to craft his own little dagger here with 2 edges, a cubit in length. And so we're, about from the fingertip down to the elbow in length. And here's the trick. He's fastened it to his right thigh under his clothes. So he has a concealed weapon. It's very concealed because it's on the wrong side. When he got frisked at the door, it's on the wrong side for where people were traditionally carrying their swords. That's key to the story. Then he presented this tribute to King Eglon of Moab. Now, Eglon was a very fat man. Not a nice thing to say about poor Eglon, but this is one of those very, it's supposed to be funny, even though it's funny in an extremely gross sort of way. And if you start Googling online Ehud, you're going to see over and over again these very fanciful stabbing scenes with the poor king getting stabbed. And he's always going to be a little bit obese. And so after Ehud presents this tribute, he says, "Hey, everybody, I gotta talk to this guy alone, okay?" Well, it's safe because he's not armed, right? So the king sends everyone, "Go on, yeah, I'm no problem." And so then Ehud reached with his left hand, ding, ding, took the sword from his right thigh and thrust it into Eglon's belly. The hilt also went in with the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not draw the sword out from his belly. And the dirt came out. Then Ehud went out into the vestibule and closed the doors of the roof chamber on him and locked them. So kills the guy, leaves the sword in there, and then he's going to slip away so that he's sure that the king has bled to death and is good and dead. So how is that for blood and gore for your Sunday school story? And yeah, another thing to do if you want to do a little web search is to see how Sunday school lessons for good Christian children do this story. And yep, I learned it as a kid. And you see how these fanciful, this is from an illustration from the Middle Ages on a tapestry, but there it is, the same sort of thing. And when he had gone, the servants are afraid to come in because Ehud has snuck out, right? And then actually makes his getaway. And the servants say, "Oh, well, he must be in the toilet. Let's just wait. Hang on. We don't want to disturb him. He'd be grouchy." And so they wait so long that he is good and dead. And that's the story. And the land had rest for 8 years. So and all of the judges' stories end with how long the peace was after this particular judge did his action. So that's the story, for what it's worth. A much more famous story is Deborah and Barak from Judges chapter 4 and 5. There are 2 chapters. The first chapter is a prose rendition of this story, and the second is a poetic rendition of the story, as we will get to. So guess what the Israelites are going to do at the beginning of this story? Ding, ding, you got it. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. So the Lord sold them into the hand of King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Notice that, again, God is going to be doing the actual actions that get people in trouble. It's not that Satan or evil comes creeping in. No, God says, yeah, take these people. Go ahead. Right. You'll notice again and again in the illustrations that I show you that these are, online as Bible illustrations. Guess what? All of these people sure do look like white suburbanites, don't they? And that's one of the interesting things about the American use of these particular Bible stories. Now, so we have this King Jabin guy of Canaan, and ding, ding, you've noticed before the Canaanites are the bad guys. We were all very happy when Samson killed a whole bunch of them last week. And here they are back again. The commander of his army was Sisera. So he's the general of the army, and he lives. And so the Israelites cry out to the Lord. Remember that pattern. They're going to go into apostasy, and then they're going to be sorry. Sorry, come and save us. Now, one of the interesting things about this story is a little bit different in that Deborah is already the judge. Most of the judge stories, we get the zoom in at the beginning of the story that this person becomes the judge. But in this story, Deborah already has been a very good judge. She's the only woman mentioned as a judge in Hebrew scripture. All right, so she is a prophetess, and she sits under the palm of Deborah. Where else to sit, right? I sit in the chair of David, right? So, you got to name it after yourself. And I'm sure that, the tradition was naming these trees in this particular grove that over and over again. Now, the Israelite commander is a fellow by the name of Barak, and she calls him up and she says, the Lord, the God of Israel commands you, go take position at Mount Tabor, bringing 10,000 from the tribe of Naphtali and the tribe of Zebulun. There's your orders, dude. I shall draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you at the Wadi Kishon. A wadi is, an oasis type thing on the river Kishon. The river Kishon, hey, you won't want to go vacationing there, really, probably, because in Arabic and in Hebrew, it means the river of slaughter or dismemberment. Not the kind of place you really want to go for a weekend. Well, so he says he's going to bring his chariots and his troops, and I'm going to take him, I'm going to give him into your hand. Barak says, if you will go with me, I'll do this. She says, yeah, no problem. I'll be real glad to do that, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Now, this is good Jewish humor at this point, because everyone would say, wait, so Deborah, what's Deborah going to do? She doesn't do anything. There's another woman involved in this. And so they go down and fight this battle. I do have a little map here, and you can see that the Battle of the Wadi Kishon is on the Kishon River, right in this area. You see the Sea of Galilee and Jordan. So we are in the northern part of Israel in the day. And of course, Judah and Jerusalem are to the south out of that particular picture, just so as you know your geography. Now, Heber, the Kenite, had separated from the other Kenites. That was the descendants of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and it camped far away. I'll get to this a little more detail about this in a bit. So she tells Deborah, said to Barak, up, for this is the day on which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. The Lord is indeed going out before you. So Barak goes down with his 10,000 warriors, and the Lord slew Sisera and all his chariot threw Sisera and all his chariots and his army into a panic. So they don't wipe them out immediately. They don't win by attacking them. God sends a panic onto them. Shades of Gideon, of course. And the Gideon character in the story is after this one, actually. So the panic occurs, and so they're going to go taking off running in their chariots, and so Barak is going to pursue them. The army of Sisera fell by the sword. No one was left. Again, very Hebrew Bible sort of exaggeration. There's no way that there was a 10,000 person army in those days. That was not sustainable. And there's no way they killed off everybody. But that's just the kind of thing, the exaggeration to just show what a grand victory this is. Now, the commander, Sisera, flees away on foot. Now, number one, that is really embarrassing, right? How come a mighty warrior got out of his big iron chariot where he's a major dude and almost completely powerful, can overpower almost anybody. And he hops out of that and he goes running. All right. And he runs to the tent of Jael, wife of Heber, the Kenite, because he can do that because he knows that King Jabin is actually at peace with this particular tribe. And he says, turn aside, my Lord, she says, turn aside, my Lord, turn aside to me, have no fear. And so he runs into her tent, and then he says, please give me a little water, I'm thirsty. She opens a skin of milk, says, which is even better, says, hey, have a drink, and rest for a while. He says to her, stand at the entrance of the tent, and if anybody comes and asks you, is anyone here, say no. Wow, that works every time, right? What a good plan he has, right? But this is the way, the kind of matter-of-factness that is going on in Hebrew scripture that doesn't come out if you're reading the King James Version. Right. But Jael, wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground. He was lying fast asleep from weariness, and he died. Okay, so nail the guy's head to the floor, won't you? And Barak comes in pursuit, and by golly, the woman says, hey, come look what I've got in my tent. And so Sisera is doubly embarrassed. One, he runs away from the battle, not what a brave general does. And two, a woman kills him, not something that happens to a brave warrior. And so he is completely humiliated in front of this particular thing. Now, I'm going to stop there because now we're going to go into the same story done in a poetic way. But we'll stop for a moment and see if we have any questions going on. And so I can get a little bit of this good beer here. So
Well, of course, that's
Yeah.
what you need. So I'll definitely reach on out to every
We
one of
got
you who are watching the stream. We've got a whole bunch. What questions do you have about Judges? And did you get
got
a good
your
set
blood.
there?
Got your gore. Got your blood. Got your gore.
So I'll definitely, when I was a kid, the way I was taught about the Judges, Deborah was seen as a character for even my friends who were female to emulate,
Mm-hmm.
with the understanding that due to the nature that they were in such a bad situation, they had to have a
Oh.
girl lead them, and that there were not enough people willing to follow the Lord, so that they had to actually use a girl to show them how unpowerful they were.
Okay. All right. Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, there are a couple ways to read this. Women in Hebrew scripture are interesting creatures, shall we say? This is a patriarchal religion. There is no doubt about that, and many of the neighboring tribes are not patriarchal. This sets up an interesting tension that's going on. But you often see that it is the powerful women who actually make things go forward, like Eve, right? I mean, Adam was just going to stay in the man cave and drink beer, right? But no, she says, hey, and we're going to get out there and find us some good and evil, right? And the same thing may or may not be happening in this story. It may be true what you're saying, that the women are used to show that only God is the most powerful, right? That God is so powerful that even women can do his work. And that may be the patriarchal point. It also may be that women are just so darn smart they can outsmart men, because that is what is happening in the story, is the guys are getting outsmarted, right? Deborah has a plan that works, and then Jael has a plan that works. There is, of course, double entendres in the Hebrew that don't come out in English, that she probably seduces him. But that doesn't really come out in the story. And so she is often, if you look at especially medieval depictions, you will see her as a harlot of some sort. And again, further denigrating women, of course. But yeah. Yeah. What do we got? Anybody got a question?
I don't think we have any questions as of this moment. Why don't you give us a little bit more? What were you taught as a kid? Did you even get the breakdown of the Judges when you were a kid?
Oh, absolutely. Now, I grew up in the era of felt boards, and so my Sunday school was always doing the little paper felt board things, and then you can stab someone with a felt board, guys. It's too bad that I'm sure kids don't grow up with those anymore. But
so I'll tell you, I worked with Child Evangelism Fellowship, age 13 to 22. I worked very closely, worked at their headquarters for a bit down in Miami and all over the place. I did felt boards for 8 years.
Oh,
yeah.
All right. Well, you need your felt board. I mean, talk about one-dimensional fun. So they're walking away, and and there's no actual foregrounding or backgrounding. But yeah. But yes, no, I learned these stories, and I think the blood and gore was part of the fun. Let's see. Some scholars feel Deborah was one of the oldest stories in Judges. Oh yes. So yes, the question or the comment is that some scholars feel Deborah is one of the oldest stories in Judges. What do you think? Yes, it apparently is. And the reason we think that is that the northern kingdoms fall in 775 BCE. All right. So the northern 10 tribes disappear from history. And this definitely is written in the northern kingdom because of the knowledge of the geography and the tribal situations there. So this was definitely has to be pre 775 BCE, and it may be as all the way back to, some people think, around 1200 BCE. It may be the oldest piece in the entire Hebrew Bible that was actually written down. We really don't know. But for those of you who haven't been following along, the textual history is that there were these oral stories floating around in the Mesopotamian area for all these years, and they were adapted by the Hebrew peoples, often like the Noah story, straight out of another story. So these are oral stories that are floating around, and then they begin to be written down after written language develops among the Hebrew people. But they're not collated until the Babylonian exile period of the 500s. So we're talking, stuff that's at least 1,000 years old when it gets written down or collated into the story that it is. So yeah, exactly.
So we have another one from Kay Williams. And this is going back to the story of Ehud, what you were starting at the beginning there. Isn't there some phrase about left-handed justice, or did I just imagine it?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if that's where that came from or not. We need to look that up. If that's the origin of that story, there you go. Because he certainly got justice from a left-handed guy. We have to Google that one. That's just too good. I didn't think of that. Good question.
And I will say that, with my background, I definitely, those were the stories, right? It was, God can even use people with these disabilities, being a woman, being left-handed, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And, and again, we have to mention the fact that, yes, in these stories, it's a good thing to wipe these people out. Murder is good here. We just have to accept that as part of the story, right?
So we have another one from Ruth. Is there any more known about Barak, I apologize, interesting name, and his relationships with the two women?
No, though this is the only place that I know of that he does appear. It's interesting because notice that he's a great general. And a great general means that you're able to call the tribes together to follow you. Some don't, but notice that he does say, Deborah, you got to go along. You're the smart one here, basically, right? So yeah.
Kay Williams does ask, he says, it's more directed at me, Justice, do you have any videotapes of preaching? Yeah, I do, and I'm burning every one of them.
All right, yeah.
There's things that should never be seen by anyone. That period of time was very hateful, spiteful, vindictive, and a period of my life that I definitely don't want to go back into.
There you go. Well, shall we go on and go to the poetry of the thing?
Let's do this.
All right. Let's see what the poets are going to say. So this is the chapter 5, the Song of Deborah. Now, if you look in most English translations of the book of Judges, chapter 5 is not broken down into any kind of poetry-looking thing. So it doesn't even draw attention to the fact that it is poetry. Now, ancient Hebrew poetry is not like older English poetry. It doesn't rhyme. They use various kinds of rhetorical devices to make it poetic. One thing is to use old language or obscure language, just like we use poetic words that we don't use anywhere else but in poetry. And then they use a lot of things like repetition, for example, and you're going to see how that repetition goes. And one of the favorite things that you see in the poetry of the Hebrews, and especially in the Psalms and in Proverbs, is that you're going to have this formula in which it says the good person da 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 da, the bad person, da, 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 and so you get this one sentence of a good something, and then the contrasting is the second. And that just goes all the way through as a rhetorical device. So then Deborah and Barak, son of Abidan, sang on that day, saying. Now, one of the things we have to notice here is that the two stories are slightly different. As we pointed out, this is the older of the stories, and the tribal situations are reported in a little bit different fashion. But again, one of the interesting things about the Hebrew scriptures is that they don't even try to correct these misunderstandings or these kind of odd juxtapositions, because they were considering this material to be old and therefore sacred, so they weren't going to mess with it, even when two traditions were not the same. When locks are long in Israel, when the people offer themselves willingly, bless the Lord. So we're going to say, oh, yeah, this is a praise to the Lord kind of thing. When locks are long, ding, ding, this should set off bells for those who know about Samson, who was a Nazarite. And that is that he can, a razor can never touch the hair on him. And that's where he gets his strength, as this dedication to the Lord. So when locks were long and the people were offer themselves willingly, because they're just so dedicated to purpose here, right? Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes, to the Lord I will sing. I will make melody to the Lord, the God of Israel. So I'm going to sing this victory song. Yay. Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens poured, the clouds indeed poured water. So I guess it rained that day, right? But, we have to say this in a very poetic way. The mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai. Remember, of course, Sinai is where Yahweh gives the Ten Commandments to Moses, right? So it's a sacred mountain in that time period, before the Lord God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, caravans ceased and travelers kept to the byways. Why? Because it's a time of lawlessness, right? The peasantry prospered in Israel. They grew fat on plunder because you arose, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. So is this actually Deborah speaking? It would be awfully egotistical to be referring yourself to in the third person, wouldn't it? So no, actually she didn't write this, right? When new gods were chosen, when war was in the gates, was shield or spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel? The answer is no. And as I mentioned last week, it's an interesting fact that the Hebrew people did not develop metallurgy. They bought their weapon supply from other people who had perfected the use of brass and then iron. So no, there wasn't a shield among them. They just didn't have armaments at that time, right? So there you go. But the author going to chase to those new gods, and again, the apostasy is one of the things. My heart goes out to the commanders of Israel who offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless the Lord. Tell of it, you who ride on white donkeys, you who sit on rich carpets, and you who walk by the way. White donkeys were kind of the Mercedes of their day. They were considered to be much more hoity-toity than gray or black donkeys. So there's a white donkey, much preferable. So the lucky folk are riding along on their white donkeys. And of course, rich carpets, we know from, Saudi Arabia. We know that in this area of desert, the carpets, woven, artistically woven carpets, are very much a trade item, very important, and it shows the wealth when you have a really good one. To the sound of musicians at the watering places, well, remember that this wadi is a watering place. It's a place that you gather from the desert to find a little respite from the desert. There they repeat the triumphs of the Lord, the triumphs of his peasantry in Israel. Then down to the gates march the people of the Lord. Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, utter a song. Arise, Barak, lead away your captives, O son of Adonam. And again, in ancient literatures, you see this over and over again. You see these honorifics given to people, and then their names are repeated, where they're from is repeated, who mom and dad were are repeated as ways to be poetic. All you got to do is look at the Odyssey to see how that works. And here's an iron chariot, by the way, that is mentioned that the Canaanites have. Again, the Israelites don't have metallurgy, so they're a little bit at a loss. So it's really good that this army panicked. This was, of course, the super weapon of the day. It's a tank. Because you're higher than the foot soldiers that you're riding into, you're faster. and you're somewhat protected. So these are very dangerous armaments and really can't be defeated by foot soldiers. And so there you go, those iron chariots. Then down marched the remnant of the noble. The people of the Lord marched down for him against the mighty. From Ephraim, they set out into the valley, following you, Benjamin. Ding, I'll tell you about him in a minute. With your kin, with marched down the commanders, and from Zebulun, those who bear the marshal's staff. And then, so what we're looking at here is the tribes that go into this battle. And that's why, it's something is historical about this, although we don't know exactly what. The chiefs of Issachar came down with Deborah, and Issachar, faithful to Barak, the commander, into the valley. They rushed out at his heels. Among the clans of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. Well, because you go, oh, I really want to do this. I don't really want to die. I'm going to search my heart a little bit. So they were very, very worried about this, of course. Why did you tarry among the sheepfolds to hear the piping for the flocks? Among the clans of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. Cowards, there they are. Just they're not going to show up for this. Now, I promised to talk a little bit about the 12 tribes. There were, according to legend, there were 12 tribes in Israel at one time. They were all descended from, the original scion of brothers, and they come down to us by these names: Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Naphtali, Dan, Zebulun, Issachar, Gad, Asher, Joseph, and Benjamin. All right, now, guess what? The only two that survive are parts, a little bit of Levi, a tiny bit of Benjamin, and then Judah. Judah is where we get the term Judea. That is where that particular tribe was living in Palestine of the day. And they're the one that doesn't get carried off and lost as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. And guess what? If you're Mormon, you think that they came over here and became the Native Americans. Probably that's not true either. They probably simply disappeared into the DNA of surrounding tribes that captured them. But it is definitely true that the Judah tribe is going to lead to Judea, and then to Jew and Jewish, etc. That's where the term comes from. And so these are the 12 tribes that are fighting. That's all in northern Israel. And Judah, as I mentioned, is further south where Jerusalem was. And what's going to happen then, and later weeks we'll talk about, is the monarchs of Judah are going to set up then Jerusalem as a holy city, and that's where all that comes from, that we're still dealing with to this day. And so Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan, and Dan, why did he abide with the ships? He's just hanging out, sailing around. He's not fighting. Asher sat still at the coast of the sea, settling down by his landings. Zebulun is a people that scorn death. Yay, brave guys, right? Naphtali too, in the heights of the field. The kings came, they fought. They fought the kings of Canaan. Okay, and so these are the guys who are the brave ones by the waters of Medigo, and they got no spoils of silver, however. The stars fought from heaven. From their courses, they fought against Sisera. So actually, the people who are in the battle, guess what? They didn't do it. Yahweh, God, did it. The torrent of Kishon swept them away. I guess that's why it's called the river of slaughter, right? The onward rushing torrent, the torrent of Kishon. March on, my soul, with might. And we get yet another. And again, one of the things you can find if you want to go looking for this stuff is Jael is often portrayed in various ways, and often with girl power, as in this particular illustration, driving that tent stake through the head of the general. Girl power going on there. So the illustrations go all the way back to the early Middle Ages of Europe. And they're still going on. This one looks fairly contemporary. There you go. Then loud beat the horse's hooves with the galloping of his steeds, right? And so they run away. Yeah. And then in 24 here, most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of tent-dwelling women most blessed. So she is one of the nomads that's out in the desert following the sheep around. in that kind of a tribe. He asked water, and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a lordly bowl. So, hey, cream cheese, right? Or no, cottage cheese. She put her hand to the tent peg, and her right hand, so she's not left-handed, her right hand to the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera a blow. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. He sank. He fell. He lay still at her feet. At her feet, he sank. He fell. Where he sank, there he fell dead. Oh, goodness. And there yet is another picture, this from a Dutch master, showing the tent stake going through the poor guy's head. Out of the window she peered. The mother of Sisera gazed through the lattice. And this is a very weird moment in this particular poem. So we've got this battle scene going on. We've got this mighty woman who's just killed this coward by nailing him to the floor, right? And suddenly the poem shifts around here, and we're in his mom's head. Where does this come from, and why would we do that? And it's not explained. It's just mom is gazing out the lattice and waiting for his son to come home. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of his chariots, the iron chariots? Her wisest ladies make answer. Indeed, she answers the question herself. Are they not finding and dividing the spoil? So they had to have won, right? A girl or two for every man, because they're taking slaves. Spoil of dyed stuffs for Sisera. Spoil of dyed stuffs embroidered. 2 pieces of dyed work embroidered for my neck as spoil. So she's going to dream of the war booty that he's going to be bringing home from this terrible slaughter. End of mom's story, and the end of the poem goes, so perish all your enemies, O Lord, but may your friends be like the sun as it rises in its might. And the land had rest 40 years. So it's a happy ending, and there you go. That's the song of Deborah. And so questions about that, or comments, or if you look in your King James Version, if you happen to have your the one that you accidentally took from a hotel from the Gideons, it doesn't look like poetry, but it is done as prose. So any questions about that as a way of doing? Ancient Hebrew poetry is really not anything like what we do. The interesting thing in English, is that the rhythms of the Psalms, when they were translated into English in the King James Version, gives rise to a whole tradition of incantatory poetry. Walt Whitman gets his the way he writes directly out of copying the English translations that really didn't know how to translate the Hebrew poetry, but the rhythms were so beautiful in the King James Version that he begins to write these very long prosaic lines for his poetry. So there's one connection. Yeah.
Well, we don't have any specific questions, which is totally good, but we are hitting right up against the 7:39, 7:40 mark. So I'm going to go ahead and grab our link. We're going to do a little after party that we always do every week. Throw a link here. That'll be started in the next 5 minutes. 5 minutes on Zoom. You can get to that by going to the link in chat. I'll throw that up here on our screen as well.
Copy it. Yeah, I'm going to copy it so I can go there. Yay.
So what I would want to say is we've been knocking out content left and right, David, you and I, and we have it was a great episode today. What is the plan for next week?
Well, next week we are going to have Reverend Wendy Jerome. She hasn't told me what she's going to be doing, but
it's a surprise.
Well, she may have been watching the inauguration today, or something like that. She may have been busy, but as you know, she always has great ideas. She is a true Bible scholar. I'm just interested for the literature. I'm in it for the poetry and the gory stories. But but Rev Wendy is a Bible scholar, and she always digs up some very, very interesting stuff. Then the next week after that, I'm going to be talking about the origins of Abraham, who, of course, is credited with being the father of the monotheisms. So we'll look back at, how he kind of irritates Dad, and that's the way every story starts for a young boy, right? So there you go.
Yeah, so we'll get a hermeneutic look at something in the interesting scholarly Bible. We'll take it from there. And then we'll kick back in with you. We're also doing Coffee and Wisdoms every morning, 9 a.m. Central Standard Time.
We are doing that. Yep.
What do we have going on tomorrow?
Well, we are going to continue talking about the idea that we've talked about this week, and it's going to kind of go into next week as well, which is, are we ready to rule ourselves? And the question there is, of course, in these stories, God is the king, right? God is the leader, and then the human kings are following along with God's will. Now that many of us don't think that's the way the world works, how we do this. And tomorrow we're going to back up a little bit and look at the ideas of the transcendent versus the immanent God, because they're very different ways of looking about how God is in the world, if there is one. So there you go.
Well, that is awesome. Well, definitely join in. Look for the podcast on any of your any players that you have for podcasts. And we will see you next week for our hermeneutic look at the Bible, the oddities, the craziness with the beer. We got it.
Absolutely.
Thank you all. Catch you later.
Thank you.